Welcome, one and all. I am Lex.
I'm Hazen Fields II.
And I'm Trey. How you doing?
Hey, everybody.
And I realized we almost got tricked.
What do you mean?
We were almost all tricked because just last episode, we talked all about Trump and the inauguration and how bad he was and all the terrible things, which is all true.
Right.
But you know what happened on his inauguration? What day it was?
What day was it?
It was Martin Luther King Day.
That
What?
son of a gun.
And that's annoying.
Yeah, it is.
It had
really
like
is.
Yeah.
In the defense of, I guess,
The Julian
time.
calendar.
Yeah, I will say, I guess it happened to land on his day. But also, they should have moved it. They could have moved it one day.
That would have been nice.
I'm just saying, I'm pretty sure this
Yeah.
wasn't a part of Martin Luther King's dream. I don't think he thought
Not
of
at
this.
all.
I don't think.
It could very well have been part of his nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, hi, everybody. This is Various Fields. And I just want to say we are here to talk about Martin Luther King and everything, I think, around that.
Everything, yeah.
We're here to talk about
Right.
Martin Luther King and specifically his dream and what we all believe he meant by his dream.
Yeah, what did he mean by his dream? And sometimes I get a little nervous talking about the dream of Martin Luther King because we sometimes believe that encapsulates the totality of the man.
Right.
He
Right.
was more than that speech. So, but we can begin to focus on that particular speech, some of the things that he tried to do or began to do and did do. But let's go a little further. Keep on going.
You know what? I want to do this, and I'm gonna cheat a little bit. I'm gonna play dumb a bit, and we're gonna ask and talk. Because it's sad that we might need to do this now. We need to talk about why Martin Luther King is important. And the
Please.
reason why I say that is not like social media, and I feel like modern times is again cheating a little bit. Because every once in a while, I'll walk into my office where I work, and it's like, especially around February, Martin Luther King Day, it'll be like a portrait of Martin Luther King and have like a quote. And then sometimes you might have to Google that quote because he may have not said it. But it'll be something just very general, like, I'm Martin Luther King and I believe in peace. And there'll be a whole bunch of like white people just applauding.
Right. The
And
internet
they're like,
applauds. Right.
yeah, I believe in peace too. I think even people who don't believe in peace think they believe in peace.
Right.
You know what I mean? But I think I want to give credit to not just the man and the dream, but to not belittle him to just quotables and make him sound like a Instagram Pinterest board. Like,
Right.
Martin Luther King once said, live, laugh, love. Like, we should Google that and double check.
Right.
So
No, absolutely.
why do we think not just him, but civil rights, the things that he fought for, the things that he stood for is important?
Well, I think that there is a positive side of, and also want to give him his full name is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King.
Jr.
He
Credits.
actually has some background to his name, what he was and what he did. I think it is interesting that he kind of, in this country, represents that which is good. And there's not too many names that are synonymous with doing good as much as Martin Luther King in this country. He becomes the billboard poster of doing well, doing good.
Jesus, MLK, Gandhi. I think a link in the somewhere in that.
Yeah, indeed. But for this country specifically, people will. I think I've mentioned this before. If you dig down now, there are so many people that have marched with Dr. Martin Luther King. Everybody has marched with Dr. Martin Luther King. So from you hearing the story, there was no one watching it on television. Everybody marched. Everybody marched. It was like everybody was for that, which was because now to say that I don't like, because you got to understand, when I was growing up, and I was born in '63, and there were times where the sounds of Martin Luther King for certain areas, it was nerve-wracking.
Oh yeah.
For the black community, because some people thought that he might have been too much. But everybody, not everybody. But you got to understand, it was a different time. Now, mind you, I was a baby at that time. But I recall my father and my parents talking about how different areas of the black community perceived the things that he was doing.
Did you march?
Of course I did.
No.
No. No. I did not. What would you say, Nels? No. I couldn't walk. No, 1963 I was born, so I would not have marched. Thank you, Nels, for the
Crawled for our
Yeah, I
votes.
crawled.
So
I crawled.
But I do kind of like this retrospective. So during the time when you were, still a youth, an infant, so there was a whole lot of, I guess, concern with the rhetoric that Martin Luther King was doing because he was more or less a rebel rouser during that time.
Rebel rousers crazy.
There were those who you see. That's interesting, because you're right. Those are words that would have been utilized, for him,
Right.
until things have changed, and now people call him. He was a radical for love.
Right, exactly.
That kind of thing, and it all depends on where you stand and where.
It's crazy that he's controversial. Like, I get
I
that,
know.
but it is terrible, but also funny. Because, that switch of rebel rouser, which is a hilarious phrase, and I haven't heard it in a while, and then switching into, radical for love means, that guy really liked the idea of love.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
I couldn't believe it. I've never thought about caring for my neighbor as much as that guy. And at first, I was against it. And that neighbor, he was black. I didn't think about him. And then he said, you should. And I was like, oh my God.
Right. Exactly.
Wowzers.
Wowzers.
I think that's the time, the
No.
I don't
think
know. How did he talk back then?
That's exclusively Inspector Gadget.
No.
Maybe. I don't know.
I don't think
got it from
wowzers. Oh, maybe. Okay.
Before we go to the other end,
Before we
continue.
I believe the quote is, and I might be saying it wrong. I believe it's history belongs to the victors. All right, written for the victors, one way or the other. But you're absolutely right. During the time when everyone is, I guess, afraid, and even now, afraid of upsetting the status quo. All right, not so much things need to be done. We don't want to do anything about it, but more the fact of what happens if something is done about it. What's the repercussions? Right. We are always standing in the the backlight of history, right? Trying to foresee what might happen from all of our individual actions. So whenever you see some reverend, right, from a church and saying he doesn't know to speak for America, he should just more or less just stake to his church. I think we had the same thing with Kaepernick, and all the other athletes that were speaking out for equal rights and any other issues that might have drawn newsworthy headlines. He's they should. I think CNN quite literally said they should definitely stick to dribbling. You know what I mean?
Right.
So but yeah, no, enough voices, right, will definitely inspire.
Fox News, by the way, not
What
CNN.
happened? Oh, it's Fox News?
Fox News,
No, makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. Right. But yeah, I think it's just interesting that we are not so much afraid of making the stand, but we don't know how far it's going to go. We don't know how big the wave is going to impact us in the future from the little voices that we, shout out now. Right. And I'm not talking about necessarily on Facebook or on Reddit or anything like that, but actually making a difference with our actions.
Right.
What's interesting is, again, I like to bring in the part of time. Now when someone speaks out, we feel like, oh man, my goodness, they're speaking out and they may be, causing themselves undue harm. When in the 60s, early when Black people were speaking out, they literally were met with their demise.
Indeed.
When people would speak up, it was literally causing them their lives. Emmett Till, Fannie Lou Hamer. There were people who were put in positions where their lives and their health and their well-being were put in jeopardy just for speaking out for what is right. So it became dangerous at one point in time for African Americans to speak out. Dangerous. You know what I'm saying? It was a dangerous thing. And so those who would speak out in those times were courageous. They were very courageous, and it's so sad. Because actually, there's a scene that was considered to be the slap heard across the world. There's a scene from a movie called In the Heat of the Night where Sidney Poitier He plays a black detective that goes to a southern town, and he's like a lead detective on a case. And he goes to a home of a very rich white guy that's there, and the white guy didn't like what he heard from him, and you got to see the scene. And he slaps Sidney Poitier right in the face, and immediately Sidney Poitier back slap. Slap.
Yeah.
But that was the slap that was heard. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Sidney Poitier's slap was considered to be the slap heard around the world in the 60s.
Right.
Not the white guy slapping, because that would be common.
Right?
That was common. But the uncommonality of a black man slapping a white person was so crazy in media and television that it was considered to be a very big slap.
Like Obama wearing a tan suit.
Okay, I'll give you that. But the point I'm trying to make is there was absolutely a time where a black man slapping a white person was not only considered dangerous, but it was unheard of, or not on a general basis. And then put on the big screen. Oh my gosh! So I'm just giving perspective as to what was considered bravery and courageousness at different times of our lives.
Speaking of bravery and courageousness, and this is not a normal transition. This reminded me of James Baldwin. One of my favorite things I think I've just ever seen in terms of like bravery and courageousness. James Baldwin was giving a speech, it was essentially a debate at Cambridge, and talking about essentially not just what it's like to be a black man living in America, but also being a black man and advocating for having rights in America. In Cambridge, a room filled with white people, one black man, I think he had one black, the gym man, I think he had like one friend, I was hoping you could kind of see him in the video, and then like advocating for his own rights and justifying like why he should be allowed to do things, walk around, have equal rights, and talk about like fighting for that while people are debating him on it. And he's the only one in the room, and doing it with such poise is insane. To be like, I should be able to walk into a store that I like to, so I can buy milk, and I shouldn't be able to beat down. And people are like, no, you shouldn't. He's like, well, hold on. Here are my reasons. Which is insane to do that without being just like infuriated.
And
it's just, I'll try to put it on a link in our, on when we post this as well, because it's one of my favorite things. But just talking about like, if ancestors isn't the word, I would say the diaspora of culture that we come from, of is like the whole thing, especially you're talking about, I want to talk about black culture, but also I want to talk about POC in general. I'm just getting a little off topic here, but I realize something I've always thought of, which isn't the truth, but it took me a minute to like, I guess, realize the dots I'm connecting aren't the same dots everyone's connecting, is I think I've always seen black people / black culture as kind of leaders of POC in America in general. Not as like, oh, more important, nothing like that, but by the nature of how the divide and split is, and the idea of the civil rights movement. And so it's always been my idea that like other POC support black people kind of across board, and other black people support other POC. And that isn't always inherent. Some people still have infighting government. And I want to be careful there. So when I say black people, I think in my head, I'm assuming our culture, but also I'm speaking for everyone who is POC in America / and that same thing, because I see it as like, I'm not just talking about us and our rights and just us and our culture and just us and our community. I'm talking about anyone, LGBTQ, anyone who's ever been oppressed, I think sometimes falls in the line in my head of black, POC. And I just wanted to kind of put that out there.
Agreed.
Because I think that's also the whole part of going back to MLK's dream. It's equality. His dream is equality. And one last thing to get myself off this rant, because it's a fun shout out to a favorite comedian of mine, Michael Che has a stand-up bit, and he has like a joke essentially about Black Lives Matter, where he goes like, sadly I have to say this, but if you remember the Black Lives Matter movement, the whole movement was brought off a whole bunch of things, but literally the main slogan is just Black Lives Matter. And we had people who disagreed with that, which means we had people saying Black Lives Matter, and we had to go against people who said, no.
Exactly.
Which is crazy. Which is like the most baseline ever. Not like we're more important. Just we matter.
Like we're also here.
We're here.
Yeah, but it was actually, here. There's another comedian, I don't know who it was, that's brought this out. And it's not even a comic line. But in the 1960s, we had to fight for civil rights. Civility. You know,
Yes,
just basic. You know, hey, can you treat me nice? Can you treat me? We had to fight for civility. You know, we
all
had
our
to
millennials
march.
and Gen Z out there, we're fighting for chill.
Right, exactly.
The right to chill.
I do. It's also interesting that like even though like every person of color has had in their history in terms of their own cultural history, there's always been some divide or some type of oppression, right? But I also found it interesting that there's always been a comparison drawn to what we've had to deal with as African American society, right? In the history of America, right? I'm not saying that anyone has not gone through their own strife or anything like that. It was like some have been in, I guess, some considerations far worse, right? But like it's always been a draw or a draw, like like a drawing to like, oh, also Black people have had it rough. We've had it rough like them. You know what I mean? And I found that.
No, I think that's the reason why I wanted to comment on the idea of like I include anyone who has gone through a version of oppression, and I guess systematic oppression, right, based off of how they were born. I think is the best way to do that. I guess it's outside of zodiacs because that's the only thing that hasn't landed in there, and I don't know why we do that. Some people would be like, "Hey, I won't mess with a Leo," or like, "I won't have kids with a Gemini." And I'm like, I don't know how that works. It just seems racist either way, and we should probably not do that. Anyways, but like, I think the main thing is like you can't compare. I try my best to not compare suffering, especially with like anything that's considered ancestral or cultural. And I also think specifically in America, you can't compare, or you shouldn't compare suffering because it's all a trick to do like infighting and get POC people who don't have the same privilege and power of white landowning men, and that white landowning also translates to having money, to fight against each other, and then that becomes infighting. I don't think.
Yeah, it's all racism.
Yeah, it's all racism, and I just want to be careful and put that out there for myself. I say a lot of Black people, Martin Luther King, and I don't want to be othering other people in the community to not. You are included in that, so I'm going to try to also say in this POC, going back to the Martin Luther King thing, the dream I think boils down to equality and equity, but not just boils down to like we should all be nice to each other, but the idea of really all of us seeing each other as individuals and as community and not being colorblind. That's not the same thing.
And you see, and what's interesting about that is that we even fight now the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion is met with some problem. Now, my problem with the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion, what are you being diverse towards? In other words, there's got to be a baseline. Right. Equity to what? Equal to what? Inclusion of what? I suggest to you that the baseline is most companies are, filled with a great deal of white people and, a lot around the world. So if you're showing diversity, you be more than that. More, and not just, but obviously it's, we understand when we have them in our job, these which are probably no longer going to be available to us. But those who are from, who are disabled in some kind of way, those who are certain ages, old, these were the diversity was that in inclusion, other religions and people that are there, if you're, I'm the idea is to not make that person feel bad or be against them, but now even the concept of like saying, hey, let's be diverse, let's have equity and inclusion, it's now looked at as a negative, and it's like, why would something that seems so simple,
just to have diversity even be a marketing point for any one business? It's like, hey, we also include other people, not just our kind,
Yeah.
It's like,
it's great, but they make it now sound like, and it was never meant to be a hiring practice. People don't hire based upon diversity, equity, and inclusion. The idea, I know in most situations, was at jobs. When you were at a job, they wanted people to have more of an opportunity of the pie of what, let's and not just based upon, putting anyone there, but if you have merit and you have that ability, skills, you should have the opportunity. But that wasn't always the case in America. If you had the skill set and this and the other, you were not. I just found out today that you guys may know of Sears, but back in the day it was Sears and Roebuck. Sears and Roebuck was what was, back in the day of the cowboys, if you will. people would have big books sent to their house, and you would order from the Sears and Roebuck magazine.
Oh.
Sears, to be a white man, but Roebuck was black, and evidently he was known as to be a watchmaker. And this and the other, and they got together somehow or another and made the Sears and Roebuck. But Sears had to be the face of Sears and Roebuck, and now we just hear of Sears. Well, but it's hardly now. But I'm just saying, Sears, Roebuck, you don't.
Right.
And it's amazing, that in order for us to survive in this country, particularly at certain times, there was, even in the '60s when you were putting record labels and stuff like that to get your song heard by everybody, you had to. Well, let's not put a blackface on there yet. Let's put a picture of a general thing. And that took some time before people started saying, hey, let's put black faces on certain things.
And I think I wanted to jump off of that because that reminds me of it. This is not a weird take, but doesn't racism / I guess any type of oppression to in terms of, again, off people's birth, racism, homophobia, and stuff like that, doesn't that seem old? In terms of, the thing that gets me about this is, I understand it's a constant, it's American, but, something about it, I felt like the idea of progression is we're understanding now. The thing that does make America great is our whole collective. The idea that we can bring a whole bunch of people together. That's the whole Statue of Liberty. You know what I mean? And now that we are taking a step back and being DEI, which is just a dog whistle for POC. That's what it's been changed into. Or anything that prevents that. Seems obviously old and kind of not just disgusting in a that's morally wrong kind of thing, but I thought we were past that. Not past racism, not past DEI, not past that, but just in a situation of when I hear anyone talk in a way that's racist or othering, most people, even that are around me, will have a version of cringe. Most people are ugh. And it seems like something that we are working on, And I get it's something we always have to fight back. So I'm not trying to be oh, it's always going to, I realize it. But at some point, I guess I just want to make racism uncool. Does that make sense?
It is always uncool, but I think that's that is how atrociously genius racism has been when it was introduced to every other country, right? Because it was a game of infighting, right? Even if you had a similar skin tone. It was quite literally the othering of another person that was part of your home, just so you could see the differences in other people, all right, and fight to be better than, And exactly. And all the while, the one who instilled such of a system is going to benefit from it because you're just oh, no, squabble amongst yourselves as to who should it get my favor. You know what I mean? And
I hear you. And I would love, my better angels would love to believe that it's old, but I believe more than old. I think it's classic. It's classic human beings. It's like you when you see separate separation of people, divisiveness, racism, greed. It's that's so human. That's so classic. We see what's happening in the Gaza Strip. It's been happening for eons.
Right.
It's so human.
Right.
It's so human, and it's not good, but it's always there. It's always there, and how do we diminish it? Is
it's hard.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
Because, like you said, it was basic tribalism is you protect you and yours, your family, and everything that's close to your inner circle. But you add, they're also different because they are darker, lighter, a different from a colorism, a different province than you, hailed from a different island than you, and it just goes on and on and on. How much do we have to segment humanity for us to realize that we're all still human?
I really think racism must have started with a guy who was really losing an argument. If you boil it down, right? racism is like, all right, white versus black, or Asian versus whatever other POC you want to add in it. But then it's like, all right, all those communities unify. But then you get to a smaller community, and then unfortunately you have people who are like, all right, now the idea of whiteness in America, then you can separate like Dutch and Italian and Jewish, and you get that. So it's going to keep going down and keep to the point where like you get somewhere, I don't know, in the Caucasus Mountains, and it's a twin. It's a guy that looks exactly the same. And that guy's like, you know what? Your nostrils are a little bit off. And that's why you're a loser. And that's why it started somewhere, I think. I think he just couldn't win an argument. So he's just... I want to blame it on Craig. Not you, Craig. The other Craig. You know what I'm talking about.
Well, supposedly Socrates had said something on the line. Where that's a Craig, There's somebody named Craig crying now.
Not that Craig, the other one.
No, the other Craig. I'm sorry. You're right. That Craig is different.
Yeah,
that Craig. No, supposedly Socrates had made a statement that said, to the effect, I'm not going to quote it correctly, but Socrates suggested if you're, if you start calling names and saying negative things to people, that's the argument of those who are losing the fight.
Right.
So in other words, oh my goodness, I do apologize, ladies and gentlemen. I'm getting over a little bit of a cold. So, but yeah, so. If we go back in the time of Socrates, could you imagine that? That all the way back then,
so cool.
When people, were feeling that they were losing a fight, they started calling you names.
I want to know how to roast someone in a Roman Empire. How do you do that?
I don't know. Right. Oh, you're such a centurion. I have no idea if that means anything. But yeah, that's what it's been. We got 3 minutes left. First of all, we want to. Well, I don't know if we did this today. Please, if you're enjoying this conversation, did we do this already?
No, we did not.
We did not. If you're enjoying this conversation, this is Various Fields, and we'd like you to come on, like, share, subscribe, hit all the buttons as we often say. But we also want you to definitely share this. What you find exciting about this with your friends. Try to subscribe. We're trying to get to 500 subscribers because we'd like to go live. And we're on our way to do that. And here at the Various Fields home, we promise to give you an interesting conversation that is at our family table. And we want to thank Nels, who's always here recording us and taking care of us. And the Only Way Out Studios has been here for us. And in March, we'll be coming up in our first year.
Yeah.
So we'll have our annual thing, and we may have a special thing going on there, but we want you to be there. So, fellas, as always, I love you both to the moon and back, And to all of you, regardless of what's happening around us, you have your voice, and you become the answer to the problems, because without you, we can't do anything.
Let's try to respect each other's differences, because that's what makes us all special.
Love isn't controversial.
Indeed. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here at Various Fields, and we will see you on next time.